Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I am Sergeant Audrey Soucy, and I will be your moderator. We will begin shortly with an opening statement from Commanding Officer of the Saskatchewan Rcmp, Assistant Commissioner Rhonda Blackmore. I will follow by providing the statement in French. After the opening statement, there will be a 20-minute for media agencies to ask questions. We ask that each media use the microphone to identify themselves and limit to one question and a follow-up. We are live streaming this event on our Saskatchewan Rcmp Facebook page. It will be available as a post on the page once the event has concluded. Thank you. Bon après-midi et merci d'être avec nous. Je suis la sergente Audrey Soucy et je serai la modératrice pour la conférence de presse. Nous commencerons sous peu par une déclaration de la commandante de la GRC de la Saskatchewan, la commissaire adjointe Rhonda Blackmore. Je vais ensuite présenter la déclaration en français. Après la déclaration d'ouverture, les médias auront 20 minutes pour la période de questions. Nous demandons à chaque média d'utiliser le micro pour s'identifier et se limiter à une question et un suivi. Nous diffusons cet événement en direct sur la page Facebook de la GRC de la Saskatchewan. La déclaration sera disponible sous peu sur la page une fois l'événement terminé. Merci.
Good afternoon. I'm here today to provide an update on the ongoing investigation of mass casualties that occurred on the James Smith Cree Nation and Weldon communities in September. I know how difficult it is for family members and the communities to revisit this tragedy. I've seen the impact of this firsthand in my time there over the past month. I would again like to offer my sincere sympathies to all victims, family members, and impacted community members. In the aftermath of the September 4th tragedy, our officers have been working tirelessly to investigate all aspects of the attacks. This includes the events and interactions leading up to the homicides until the arrest of Myles Sanderson. I know there has been significant interest from the public relating to the activities of Myles and Damien Sanderson hours before the mass casualties. The information I'm about to share is just one of the over 4,600 calls the Saskatchewan Rcmp received from the public between September 3rd and September 8th, 2022. A complete investigation and review of all these calls is ongoing to ensure investigators thoroughly examine every call to the Saskatchewan Rcmp pertaining to this incident. It is likely that information already or yet to be collected may alter the investigative account of the sequence of these events. Therefore, the information we have today is based on what is currently known to investigators in relation to the activities of Damien Sanderson hours before the attacks. On Saturday, September 3rd, 2022, at approximately 4 a.m., Melfort Rcmp received a report that Damien Sanderson stole a vehicle on the James Smith Cree Nation. The caller explicitly requested multiple times during the initial and follow-up calls to remain anonymous. At approximately 4:15 a.m., 2 officers from the Melfort Rcmp detachment responded. On their way to the James Smith Cree Nation, as part of their investigation, the officers confirmed Damien had a warrant for his arrest for a previous assault. The 2 officers looked at a photo of Damien from the Rcmp police record and occurrence system to assist them in their search efforts. The most recent photo available of him in that system was from 2014. The officers contacted the caller, who declined to provide an initial statement to police or to provide any further details about the stolen vehicle. The officers conducted extensive patrols throughout James Smith Cree Nation in an attempt to locate Damien and the stolen vehicle. Officers contacted the caller a second time to see if they would know of any other locations where Damien may be. The caller suggested police search for the vehicle on North Road on James Smith Cree Nation. Officers immediately went to the search area and located the vehicle parked in front of a residence on North Road. The vehicle was empty, the windows were down, and the keys were missing. The officers confirmed the vehicle belonged to the caller by the license plate. Officers contacted the caller to confirm the vehicle had been located. The caller planned to retrieve the vehicle. While checking the area surrounding the vehicle, officers spoke with occupants of a nearby RV, but none had seen Damien. The officers then knocked on the door of the residence and obtained consent from the homeowner to conduct a search for Damien. Inside the residence, the officers observed 3 males among a group of approximately 7 individuals. The males in the residence were asked to identify themselves. None of them identified as Damien Sanderson. The keys for the stolen vehicle were recovered from inside the residence. Officers were unable to obtain any information from the occupants of the residence about how the vehicle got there. The caller arrived at the residence to retrieve the vehicle shortly after 6 a.m. The officers again asked the caller if there were any other locations that Damien may be. The caller suggested to check a residence on River Street for Damien before leaving in the vehicle. Officers attended the address on River Street and spoke to the occupants who advised Damien was not there. Officers contacted the caller again to provide an update and asked if there were any other locations to search for Damien. The caller did not know of any other locations. The officers checked every location the caller provided them and patrolled the community in its entirety over the span of approximately 3 hours from when the initial report was received in search for Damien. There was no evidence or witnesses available at the time to support a charge of a stolen vehicle. Before attending to other policing duties, the officers requested the caller contact them immediately if there was any new information to assist with their search. Through follow-up statements during the investigation, we later confirmed Damien provided a false name to responding officers during the search of the residence. He had been at the residence and verbally provided the officers the name of another, a real person in the community. Investigators were able to confirm the vehicle was taken from the caller sometime between noon and 9 p.m. on September 2nd, 2022. I'd like to be clear. At no time during the first 911 report to police or any of the following conversations between Melfort Rcmp officers and the caller on the morning of September 3rd was Myles Sanderson's name or actions or any threats of violence reported to police. The Saskatchewan Rcmp had no information or indication that would suggest any violence was to occur. The events that were going to unfold the next day were unknown to police at that time. Today, as a result of the ongoing investigation into the mass casualties on James Smith Cree Nation, investigators have been able to determine the following. Myles and Damien Sanderson were actively selling drugs in the community on September 3rd. Both Myles and Damien were involved in at least 3 violent altercations involving other individuals in the James Smith Cree Nation. It is unknown at this point whether any weapons were involved. None of these violent altercations were reported to police prior to the homicides being committed on September 4th. Evidence collected and analyzed by investigators to date have determined Damien was involved in the initial planning and preparation for the attacks on September 4th. We are still investigating the extent of Damien's involvement. On September 5th, the Saskatchewan Rcmp advised the public that Damien Sanderson was charged with 1 count of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and 1 count of break-and-enter. This was based on our preliminary investigation and information from victim and witness accounts. After completing 250 interviews, processing over 670 exhibits, reviewing and following up on over 100 911 calls for service, investigators have determined that Damien Sanderson was a victim of homicide by Myles Sanderson. Myles Sanderson committed all of the homicides alone. This brings the total number of people who were killed by Myles Sanderson on September 4th, 2022 to 11. All charges related to this investigation have been withdrawn by the Crown following the deaths of Myles and Damien Sanderson. The Saskatchewan RCMP believes it is important to clarify Damien's involvement in the sequence of these events to demonstrate our continued commitment to transparency to the victims and the families of those affected and to the public. Our investigators continue to corroborate witness statements with physical evidence and exhibits to create an accurate picture of the motives behind these crimes and why some of the victims were targeted. This will take time to complete, and the reality is we may never really know exactly why. Based on the large quantity of information, it will take months to provide a full timeline of all the events that took place prior to and following September 4th. The RCMP Major Crime Unit is currently reviewing all the evidence to piece together a comprehensive timeline to provide an accurate picture of the events, which we remain committed to sharing with the public once it is complete. The Saskatchewan RCMP continues to support the James Smith Cree Nation, community of Weldon, and surrounding communities. Officers from the Saskatchewan RCMP Indigenous Policing Services Unit and the Melfort RCMP have had the privilege of participating in several pipe ceremonies, smudges of the impacted houses, sweats, and other ceremonial events to support the communities over the past month. The Saskatchewan Victim Services Unit continues to work closely with family members of victims and those affected by the incident to ensure ongoing support and communications are provided for their healing process to continue. We understand the significant interest in this investigation and know there are still many questions left unanswered. Many of these answers will be released during the coroner's inquest scheduled to take place in 2023.
Hi, Lisa with CJME. You mentioned 3 violent incidents. I just wanted to double check when those happened.
Those incidents happened the day before the occurrence on September 4th, so it would have been during the September 2nd and September 3rd during that time period.
Okay. I'm not one to complain about getting more information, but we had been under the impression that nothing else was going to be released until the coroner's inquest, so I'm just wondering why you decided to release this stuff today.
We were in communication with the chief coroner and his office, so they're aware that we were providing this information. We felt it important to address some of this information to balance both the interest by the family and the victims as they work on healing from this incident so that they have answers to their questions that are part of that healing journey that they're on, as well as information for the public so that they have answers to the questions that are being raised.
And just so I've got it correct, this would put Damien, take him out of the suspects column and put him into the victims column then?
When it comes to the actual homicides that were committed, our evidence indicates that Damien did not commit any of the homicides.
Okay, thank you.
Mickey here with the Canadian Press. Can you just kind of elaborate on that last question? You had mentioned that Damien, there's evidence to suggest Damien was in the planning, was part of the planning and preparation, but didn't kill anyone. So, you know, what role did he play in all of this? Did he do stakeout? What can you offer any details on that?
I can't go into the specifics of that. That will be part of the larger timeline that we're still putting together. He was involved in the planning, but we can say with the information we have that he did not actively commit any homicides.
Yeah, and then obviously Global News was the first to report after interviewing Sky Sanderson. So my question is, did police actually interview Sky Sanderson prior to charging Damien, or I guess where was the I don't know what the word is, but I guess, yeah, why did police believe that Damien was involved in some of the killings?
So there's multiple, as I said, over 250 statements have been taken from witnesses. And our major crimes unit was on scene very much after these incidents occurred, very soon after there on the 4th of September, and started that investigative process. So when taking statements, it's not just about obtaining that information. And when you have the large number of witnesses that we had to the variety of crime scenes that we had, that information has to be corroborated. So that information is all put together. So based on the information they had at that time, they had enough information to charge Damien Sanderson with the charges that they did. and that was based on the information they were receiving. At that point, it wasn't known that Damien was deceased, and so that information was based on the information they were receiving.
And then, sorry, last for me, there's no evidence or witnesses available at the time to support the charge of the stolen vehicle. Why is that? And did that then not give police recourse once they were inside the house to ask for ID?
We had no indication that any of those individuals, they hadn't identified themselves. We had no evidence indicating that they were specifically involved. As we mentioned, there were 7 individuals, and we had nothing to specifically point that they were directly related to the theft of the vehicle.
Hi there, Brandon Harder from the Leader Post. I know you mentioned the name Myles didn't come up in the police interaction surrounding the stolen automobile. But as I understand it, there was a warrant out for Myles' arrest for some time, I believe since May. I'm just wondering if the RCMP had any information or were given any tips that Myles could be in the area prior to these events happening, and if so, what was done to follow up?
We did not have any information related to Myles Sanderson being in that area, no.
Okay, and I'm just wondering if you can further expand a little bit on, the medical distress that Myles was said to have gone into when in custody, what life-saving measures officers took, and whether that included application of Narcan or naloxone or something of the like.
So those pieces of information that's part of the Saskatoon Police Service investigation, and we're not able to speak to that. That will be part of their investigation, and again, that'll be part of the coroner's inquest when that occurs in 2023.
Troy Charles with Global News. So in our reporting with Skye Sanderson, she was under the impression that Myles and Damien were both questioned in that house with the group of 7 men. Were you saying Damien gave a fake name? Is that untrue, or what are the findings there?
Our witness information that we have indicates that Damien Sanderson did provide a false name, and it was the name of an individual who resides on James Smith Cree Nation. There's indication that since that photo that we had of him in our police records management system, that his build had changed, and they did not recognize him, despite having looked at that photograph on their way to the call. So his appearance had changed, and providing the false name, they did not realize that it was Damien Sanderson in the house.
So Myles Sanderson was not in there and giving any false names either?
We have no information at this time regarding Myles Sanderson and his involvement in that house at that time. And keep in mind, at that point, they were focused on finding Damien Sanderson because there was no indication and no information provided about Myles Sanderson having been involved in the theft of the vehicle or any of that information received that morning.
What is the protocol for keeping these photos up to date? Is it usual to have an 8-year-old photo for a current warranted suspect?
So our records management system works on a retention system based on the retention period for the offense that has been committed. Those photographs remain with the files. They do become dated until that file is purged from the system, because if there's no other offenses committed, then there's no additional photographs taken. So that's the information we have. It remains part of the file, and that retention period goes with the photograph as well.
Would you say that there might be a gap there in that protocol with what has taken place with build changing and this photo not looking like the current state of Damien?
It was a dated photo, but if he hasn't committed a criminal offense, we can't go and ask people for an updated photograph for our records management system. We have to use what we have on the system at the time that they were arrested for the offense.
Thanks.
Hello, Sam Sampson from CBC News. Considering that RCMP officers were looking for someone who already had a warrant out for his arrest, it wasn't just a 911 call in the moment, why wouldn't they check IDs in that RV group?
So that group was actually in the house. The people in the RV were a separate group, but the group in the house was where the 7 individuals are located. And just because one of those people may have a warrant for arrest, it doesn't give us sufficient grounds to request photo ID from everyone in that location. So we need reasonable grounds to be able to do that. We can't work on mere suspicion alone.
And what would you say to people who, after hearing that RCMP were in James Smith looking for one of the accused at the time, what do you say to people who might believe that RCMP could have prevented the massacre that happened the next day?
That would be pure speculation. We had no indication that there had been violence committed. The assaults that had occurred were not reported to police prior to the mass casualty events that occurred on the 4th of September, and we had no reason to believe that they were going to commit those events. We had no information or intelligence leading us to believe that. So that would be pure speculation that there could have been a change to the outcome.
We've heard that some family members were concerned that they were being targeted as well. Is there, for lack of a better phrase, like a hit list that was found at all or part of the investigation?
So any information related to how those individuals may or may not have been targeted is going to be, again, part of that larger timeline once we're able to put all of that information together. There's still a lot of information that's being processed and corroborated, and making sure that we have the factual information, because as you can well imagine, it was a very traumatic incident for witnesses, and so we have to make sure that the information they're providing can be corroborated through other sources as well.
Last one, which drugs were the brothers selling in the community? What kind of drugs?
I don't have that specific information.
Okay, thank you.
Lisa with CJME again. Do you have any definitive indication whether Myles or Damien were actually in Regina?
We had information initially that we felt was credible information, and then the information following up on that as we piece the events together of not only September 4th, but the following days up until Myles' arrest. That will, again, all be part of that timeline as we work to determine what was accurate information and what was not.
Okay, so I haven't figured out definitively yet.
Not yet, no.
And I just want to make sure I'm correct. Did you say that Damien died before the incidents on September 4th?
Damien was killed by Myles Sanderson. We know that to be true, and he was not involved in any of the homicides.
So did he die before those homicides took place?
So again, that timeline on how that that occurred is part of that bigger investigation and that larger timeline that's taking some time to put together.
Okay.
You mentioned that he wasn't involved in any of the homicides, but could he have injured any of the 18 people? Damien.
Again, that's going to be part of the timeline that we put together. As all of that information, there's, as you can imagine, lots of information to piece together there.
I'm sorry, you were speaking a little bit earlier about having grounds to check for folks' IDs, and you said, you know, the idea that somebody there may have a warrant out for their arrest wasn't enough grounds to be asking folks for an ID. I guess in an instance where you have a stolen automobile, or at least a report of one, what would be the grounds for an officer to approach people and ask them for identification when asking for a name?
An obvious example that I can think of is, you know, they're holding the keys to the stolen vehicle in their possession, right? It was those keys were in the house, but they weren't attributed to any one individual. So, you know, that type of direct link starts to allow us to put those investigative pieces together.
Okay, and you mentioned planning and that Damien had been involved in planning. Now, can you expand a little bit on that? Like, was there extensive planning here? How soon did the planning begin? What did the planning entail? What do you know about that?
So all of those details, again, are still being thoroughly investigated. We do have evidence to say that he was involved in that planning, but the extent of that, we're going to have to continue to follow up on that information.
Just getting back to kind of the original question about what the coroner had told us would be coming out, are we to expect these similar conferences if bigger information is found out before the inquest next year?
Depending on the information that we have and you know, the assessment on the urgency for the public to know that's going to dictate how this unfolds. It's going to be months until we have those pieces put together. So again, that will be done in consultation with the Chief Coroner's Office. And if there is information that we believe is important, we felt today it was important to let the public know and let the family of the victims know the extent of Damien's involvement in the actual homicides. That's a very important piece to them when it comes to their processing of the incident and their healing.
Brianna Franco with CBC French. Je vais poser les prochaines questions en français, c'est correct. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire pourquoi avoir décidé aujourd'hui de partager l'information et ne pas attendre le rapport du coroner? Could we get the answers in French or? OK, parfait. Perfect. Awesome. C'est bon, merci.
So again, we felt it was important that that information be relayed so that we could inform the public and make sure the victims and the families of the deceased victims have the information related to particularly Damien's involvement.
Alors, la raison pour laquelle on vous donne cette information-là aujourd'hui, c'est qu'on croyait que c'était important pour les familles, pour leur guérison, et puis pour les communautés puis le public de savoir c'était quoi vraiment l'implication de Damien dans les événements qui ont mené aux homicides. C'est pour ça qu'on le fait aujourd'hui.
And knowing that Damien was in that home, what do you say to people who think that this could have been prevented?
Again, that would be pure speculation. We can't say what would have happened if something else had occurred. So again, it would be speculation on our part to make any assumption on that.
Ouais.
Alors, ce serait de la spéculation de dire qu'est-ce qui aurait pu arriver si on avait fait quelque chose ou si on avait su plus d'informations. À ce moment-là, on n'avait aucune information qui nous portait à croire qu'il y aurait des événements d'une telle violence qui se produiraient. Alors, ce serait juste de la spéculation à ce moment-ci.
And could you tell us what information we'll have in the coming weeks or coming months with that timeline you've been talking about?
Eventually, we want to put the entire timeline together. Now, whether that information is released prior to the coroner's inquest or during the coroner's inquest, that will remain to be seen. But we want to make sure that there's full transparency. We've committed that to the people of Saskatchewan so that they have the information there, and we want to put that full timeline together, but it does take a significant amount of time based on the information, because it is a large quantity of information.
Alors, éventuellement, on veut avoir toutes les séquences d'événements, évidemment, à procurer au public, mais si l'information sera diffusée avant ou après l'enquête du coroner, ce sera à voir avec le bureau du coroner aussi, pour être certain qu'on ne donne pas d'informations qui pourraient affecter leur rapport à ce moment-là.
No, merci beaucoup.
John Cairn, SAS Today. Regarding the three other altercations on September 2nd and 3rd, these were assault instances, were they, or what exactly were they?
There were violent incidents involving assaults on persons, yes.
Okay. And with respect to I guess, the determination that Myles acted alone and that Damien was a victim of homicide, maybe you could explain what basis you have for that finding and maybe explain that in a little more detail.
So I can't go into the specific details. Again, that information will be provided further down the road. But what I can say is that it's based on several different investigative avenues. That includes witness information, witness recounts, what they saw, forensic analysis, all of those types of pieces that we're putting together. DNA analysis, all of those pieces will be part of that have led us to this determination, but the specific details of that will come with that larger timeline.
And the timeline itself still to be firmed up then as well, or?
The timeline of how
Of that
those events-
particular day? Yeah.
Yes. So that's exactly what the investigators are working on. They have some of that put together, but as you can imagine, there's a lot of pieces of information. Those, just the 4,600 calls that came in during that time period, they have to go through each one, make sure that none of it was related or provides them with additional information that might have previously not been assessed.
Stephanie Davis with CTV News. Is there anything you can give us on motive now that we know that there was planning in place? Is there anything that you can give us?
I can't really speak to that. And again, as I said, unfortunately, we may never have all of those answers. We're simply working with the evidence that we have and using that evidence. But at this time, we don't have anything specific that lays out this is why this has happened or going to happen.
Okay, and, you know, do you believe that maybe there was a plan at the beginning and then it maybe went beyond that with so many killings that followed?
I think it's fair to say there was indication that that Damien was involved in the violence, that he had provided that information. However, it seems that there may have been something that changed as those incidents unfolded.
Okay, thank you.
Do RCMP still believe that some of the attacks were at random?
There is a possibility that some of those attacks were random. Again, that's all part of that information. We're looking at linkages, victims, and how did they have a linkage to Myles Sanderson or within the community.
So, yeah, I'm just trying to get a bit of a better understanding. You know, I think you folks have offered a lot of information about specific things today and other things you haven't offered information on. You know, obviously, I would imagine you folks have had time to speak with the officers who were there at the time of the arrest. I think a lot of folks are frustrated trying to understand why you won't disclose information about the medical distress, what officers saw at the time of the arrest that would have led them to believe that, what they did. Like, why is it that you're not able to provide that information? Is it that you don't know, or that you can't, or why?
It comes down to that independent oversight. So if we're reporting information on actions we took, that independent oversight almost becomes moot. So we have to make sure that we're allowing the Saskatoon Police Service to conduct that investigation independently, and that is information for them to determine and for them to release. They may choose to release that, or it may be part of the coroner's inquest. Okay, thank you so much for coming, everyone, today.